So I want to tell you a little story and then talk to you for a minute and then maybe give you a challenge at the end of this video. And the story is this. I've got a friend who is homeschooling her youngest son, and she is part of several homeschool groups that, you know, it's to let the kids socialize with other kids. And occasionally on one of these events, you know, play date in the park, or sometimes they get together and go to the roller skating rink, or, you know, just whatever. But occasionally you'll get a conflict between two of the children. And this friend of mine was contacted by the leader, I guess you would call it, of this homeschool group, and basically said, maybe a little more politely worded than this, but this was the message that was conveyed. Your son was being rude to and throwing things at some of the other children, and you need to do something about it. And knowing my friend and her son, this is a possibility, but also knowing some of the other people in this homeschool group and their children, it's also a possibility that that's not really what happened. And I think that what should have happened, the message that should have been conveyed, should have been, there was an incident, your child is involved, here is what the parents of the other child are saying happened. I'd like to get your side of the story. I'd like to try to find out what the truth is, and, you know, see what really is the truth before I make a judgment. And I'll tell you why this is important to me for a few reasons. There was an album by a group put out when I was in my late teens, either just before or just after I graduated from high school, I can't remember, and I'm not going to say the name of the group because it's a secular group and it's really not about them or even the content of the album. But the title of the album was a very interesting concept. The album was titled Three Sides to Every Story. And it was a double vinyl LP set. And I didn't own this. A friend of mine's older brother owned it, so I can't say for sure, but my recollection is this, that the first side of the first LP was titled Yours, meaning your side of the story, and it had songs and a theme along that. The second side of that was titled Mine, and again, it was, you know, themed songs about my opinion, my version of the truth. And then the second album, the whole thing, And I don't remember if it actually had two sides or if they just pressed it on one side so there were 3 album sides, or if there was 4 and the whole second album was titled The Truth. And it blew me away because I realized that that is the case in almost every situation. There's your perception of things, and there's my perception of things, and then there's the truth. And unless you've taken the time to do some investigation to find out what the truth is, to find out which of the 2 kids is lying, or if they're both lying, or if they're both mistaken, find out what actually happened in the situation. Until you do some investigation, you don't really know what the truth is. We all have our perceptions, we all have our biases, and particularly when it comes to our children, we're biased. Our children are perfect little angels and they don't ever do anything wrong, and that's not the case. And in the situation that I laid out before, was my friend's kid perfectly right? Maybe, maybe not. Was the other child perfectly right? Maybe, maybe not. I don't really know what the truth is because I haven't spoken to either one of the children or the parents. I wasn't there when the event happened. I don't know what the truth is. I haven't done the investigation. And that's the point. Have you done the investigation? And I'll tell you why. Because Jesus says things like, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but through me. Okay, well, that's pretty objective. We know that Jesus is the truth, according to what he claims. So you either believe in Jesus or you don't. So if you believe Jesus, what he says is the truth, that he is the truth, and there's really not a lot of room for your opinion in that matter. You can investigate that in 30 seconds. Look up the scripture. See if I quoted it accurately. But then Jesus says, also, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Well, how do you know the truth? Is it just some feeling that you have? I mean, the Bible says the human heart is incredibly deceitful and is desperately wicked and is not to be trusted. So you can't trust your feelings. Well, how do you know then what the truth is? Well, in the same way that the parents don't know what the truth is with their child and the incident that he was involved with without at least investigating it. And they still might not ever be able to tell exactly what happened. But they have to at least investigate to even have a shot at knowing what the truth is. And when this group leader didn't even try to do an investigation, just assumed that one of the children was at fault to start with, they demonstrated they weren't looking for the truth. They weren't looking for what was real. They were looking for there not to be any drama within the group and for the boat not to be rocked. The Apostle Paul, though, tells us to test all things, and he also tells us to hang on to whatever is true and lovely and that sort of thing. But he tells us we need to test the spirits, test all things, to see whether or not they are true. In fact, the Bereans, Luke writes that the Bereans were more noble than those in Thessalonica because they did test the truth. They didn't just believe what Paul was writing to them. They dug through the scriptures. They searched through the scriptures to see if what Paul had told them was true. So in order to have the truth and determine what the truth is, and not just get your opinion or my opinion or the opinion of another person, even a person who is in a position of authority, like the Apostle Paul, who is literally writing scripture, who was literally an apostle. They were commended for questioning him. To know the truth, you have to be willing to question your leadership, your authority figures, your church, your religion that you have grown up in. Or if you're an atheist, your lack of religion that you may or may not have grown up in. And so my challenge is this. Remember that there are two sides to every story, at least. Most of the time, there are three sides to every story. Yours, mine, and the truth. And so I challenge you to whatever your beliefs are. If you are a Mormon, if your religion is Islam, if you are a Buddhist, if you are an atheist, if you are a Hindu, if you are into New Age, if you are a Wiccan, if you are a neo-pagan, maybe you worship Thor, who knows? Whatever your system of beliefs is, I challenge you to question your faith. Look at the evidence for it. And I'm not talking about just a quick Google search and taking the word of whatever you run across. Look at those things that you run across and go, are they legitimate sources? For example, if you're reading something that says, is the Bible reliable? And it is by some dude with no qualifications, you have no idea who he is, and he says that the Bible is unreliable because Christians copied from this and this and this ancient religion. That's not a reliable source. You can't take what that guy is saying at face value. You need to actually go look at those sources that he says and see if they're actually true. And check the dates of those sources. If you're talking about whether or not the Bible is reliable and you are using a source that is 600 to 1,000 years after the Bible was written, but it claims that the Bible copied stuff before it, but doesn't really, where does it cite? Where is its sources? With the Bible, there are ancient Greek manuscripts that go back within, depending on your dating, somewhere between 20 and 60 years of when the last of the original 12 apostles, John, died. That's pretty close. That should be a pretty reliable source. Especially if it looks like it's a first or second generation of something that was actually written by John or Peter or Paul or James or Jude or Matthew or Mark, Luke. If you are a Muslim, if you follow Islam, then I encourage you to look at the Quran. The claim with the Quran is that it is absolutely perfect, that there's nothing wrong with it, that it has not been changed. Look up the 6 oldest manuscripts of the Quran in Arabic and see if there's any differences. You might be shocked at what you find. If you are a Jehovah's Witness, look at the difference between most other translations of the Bible and the New World Translation of the Bible. What are the differences? Why are the differences there? Are the differences legitimate or not? You may have to do a little digging because you probably don't know Greek or Hebrew. But if you're talking about your eternal salvation, if you're talking about your belief system, isn't it worth a little bit of digging? If you are a Christian, which I am, and this is going to shock a lot of you, I challenge you to look into whether or not the Bible is true. Is it consistent within itself? Does the Old Testament agree with the New Testament? Does Paul agree with Jesus? Do Jesus and Paul agree with James? And has the Bible been corrupted? Look into how many New Testament manuscripts there are, how old they are, how have they been preserved. Look into the fact that it isn't a translation of a translation of a translation, that the New Testament is directly translated from Greek into English, or if you live in another country, maybe it's translated from Greek into Polish, or Greek into Swahili, or Greek into Spanish, or whatever. Look into the differences between the manuscripts. Are there significant doctrinal differences between the manuscripts, or is the message consistent throughout all of them? And I would urge you to not just read Christian scholars, even though I would encourage you to read Christian scholars and listen to their conclusions. I would encourage you to at least become familiar with a guy named Bart Ehrman, who is a former evangelical Christian and is now the leading atheist or agnostic, I'm not sure what he is, critic of the New Testament, and at least be familiar what he has to say. And then look up guys like Dr. Daniel Wallace, who runs the Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts. Look up a guy named Michael Kruger, Dr. Michael Kruger. Look up a guy named Dr. James White, and see what they have to say about the reliability and transmission of New Testament manuscripts. And you can do the same thing with the Old Testament and the Hebrew and the Greek Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Old Testament, which, by the way, was translated before Jesus was born, so it's pretty old. Compare those to the Dead Sea Scrolls. Look at the compare them to the Hebrew Masoretic texts of the 11th century, which is, at least to my knowledge, the oldest Hebrew copies of the Old Testament that we have that are complete. There is some older stuff that is some fairly large chunks of it anyway, from the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Qumran caves, that sort of thing. If you don't know these things that I'm spouting about, the Masoretic text, the Qumran caves, the Dead Sea Scrolls, you might want to do a little bit of research. You might want to watch a few videos on YouTube. Make sure that the people that you're checking out are reliable. By the way, when we're talking about this as well, when you're talking about investigating and getting the full story, please do not believe me. Do not take anything that I say at face value as being right. Check it out. Look for the truth. Investigate. Because if you don't know whether or not you're just getting my opinion, or I'm actually somebody that's an informed person and has done the investigation, has spent the time doing the research, which I have, but I don't want you to take my word for it. And the last group that I want to address is the LDS, Latter-day Saints, Mormons, whatever you want to call them. And I address them specifically because God has given me a heart for these people. Some of these people are wonderful people with an intense desire to serve God. And I believe if you're an LDS person, if you're seeing this video, if you're another one of the other many Mormon denominations that have descended from Joseph Smith, and if you're LDS, that may surprise you. I get different sources, and this is one where I haven't found the truth yet, but I have been told that there are as few as 70 Mormon denominations and as many as slightly over 400. But minimum, verifiable, there are at least 70 Mormon denominations. So if you think your church is the only one because you were following Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon, well, you're a minimum one of 70 that believes Joseph Smith is true and is following the Book of Mormon. And this is why I encourage you, do the research yourself. Don't take your church's word for it. If Jesus says you will know the truth and the truth will set you free, then looking at other things is not going to be harmful, because you will know the truth. Looking at what your church says is anti-Mormon literature, you should be able to tell what is the truth and what is not, and it should only strengthen your faith if your faith is right, and it will only harm your faith if it is not right. Look into the life of Joseph Smith. Look into the history of Joseph Smith. Look into the history of other leaders of your church. Brigham Young. Look into the latest ones. Look at what Gordon B. Hinckley said about whether or not he worships the same Jesus as we do, or has the same Jesus. Maybe he wouldn't even worship Jesus. Look at the book of Abraham and find out whether or not there are problems with that. Look at the fact that it has been verified by not only Egyptologists, but also archaeologists from the LDS Church who have verified that the document that he used to translate the Book of Mormon is not something that was written by Abraham, that it was written by some Egyptian as a funerary text for a guy named Hor. It is actually called the breathing permit of Hor. Look at the fact that he mislabeled every single one of the pictures. Look up what actual Egyptologists have said about that document. Look up if there are any examples anywhere in the world of a language called Reformed Egyptian, which is what the Book of Mormon was supposed to have been written in. Look up the archaeology of the Book of Mormon. Has a single artifact ever been found from any of the societies mentioned in the Book of Mormon in the Americas? Look for verification of any one of those cities. Can you tell me where Zarahemla was? Supposed to be the biggest city of these two societies. Look for writings referencing any of these societies by any of the North American or South American native societies. The Aztecs, the Incans, the Mayans, the Cherokee, the Navajo, pick one. Does anybody even mention any of these other societies? Is it true? Have you dug into your religion, whatever it is? Christian, Mormon, Buddhist? What did the Buddha say about what was going to happen to him when he died? What does the Quran say about the Bible? Does the Quran say the Bible is reliable or not? I want you to think about what you believe. If the truth really will set you free, if Jesus is right, then it doesn't hurt to get both sides to the story, to get do a little investigation, to think about whether or not what you believe is actually true.